With the spring transfer portal window ending, we have a pretty good idea of who will be on this Texas football roster come August 31st against Colorado State. So, with that being said, when you look at each room on this football team right now, would you classify each one as good, great, or elite?
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by Monopoly Go. Game off. We got to talk more about Monopoly Go. This fast-paced game lets you team up with friends for tournaments to unlock awesome prizes like unique stickers for trading, cool playing pieces, and hilarious emojis for taunting your friends. So download Monopoly Go now free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. On today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, we are discussing each room on this football team. Once again, good, great, or elite, from the quarterback room to the safety room, now that the spring transfer portal window is closed. And once again, we have a pretty good idea of who will be on this football team come August 31st. All of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So it's the off season, and sometimes you got to pull content out from under your hat, right? I'll use the PG-13 version of the saying. So today's episode is somewhat of a remix, right? It's somewhat of a remix. Earlier in the off season, probably way too early in the off season, I came on here and assessed my confidence level going into 2024, kind of way too early, right? Of these rooms, right? Of the players in the rooms and how I felt about, the quarterback room, defensive tackle room, safety room, et cetera, going into the season. But that was prior to, the spring football window, a month of us seeing them play actual football, right? And things actually materializing in these rooms. That was prior to 9 players, coming over to the University of Texas in the transfer portal this offseason. 9 really good players, that are going to probably move the needle. And then that was before, which I didn't even realize the number was this high, but I guess this is a good thing, right? And that was before 21 players decided to enter the portal and leave the University of Texas to head to other destinations, right? And, this is going to be somewhat of like a Blue's Clues situation where I ask you a question that I can't get the answer back to in real time. But seriously, I want to ask you this question, right? And just pose it to you. Does it feel like since the season ended, 21 players from the University of Texas have entered the transfer portal and left? To me, it doesn't. Right. And I read the list. There were 21 players, but I guess that's a good thing, right? Because I've said on the podcast a few times, there was a lot of good players. Definitely going to miss Savion Red, definitely going to miss Malik Murphy. We're going to be watching, a lot of Duke play this year, but you're not necessarily missing them in those rooms, right? The only players I felt like we would really miss were Terrence Brooks and Austin Jordan, and they did a really good job of bringing in Javion Cole, who was just a superstar last year at San Jose State. So, I think it's a testament to this coaching staff, the players we have on the roster, and just the talent acquisition we've seen over the last 3 to 4 years, that you can lose 21 players from your roster and still be a legitimate national championship contender. So, I say it all the time, but shout out to the players and shout out to the staff and just shout out to the, administration for the investment that they've put in this football team, right? Because all of that over the last 3 years is the reason that Texas is back, right? So when we look at it, the spring transfer portal window has ended. You can't enter the portal at this point, right, and be eligible for the 2024 season. Obviously, if you're already in the portal, you can still choose your destination and be eligible. So we have a pretty good idea of what the roster will look like going into the season. Texas right now at 82 scholarship players, so they have the flexibility to get up to 85, either by adding more players throughout the portal or handing some, walk-ons some scholarships, which is always a great moment. But there's no penalty for staying at 82 as well. It's just an 85 scholarship limit. And, just to clarify for everybody, there's not 82 players on the football team, right? There's only 82 scholarship players. You have walk-ons like Sark's son, Brady Sarkeesian. We saw 2 walk-ons score in the orange and white game, and Thatcher Milton and Reese Beauchamp. So, it's not 82 players on the football team. It's just 82 scholarship players with the flexibility to get up to 85 before the season starts. So, since you can only add, up to 3 more players, like I said, we have a pretty good idea of what this team will look like come August 31st against Colorado State. So without further ado, this is me ranking what each room, or classifying, I guess, good, great, or elite, each room on the football team from quarterback to safety. And I'm going to start with the quarterback room. Now that I've talked for 5 minutes, I apologize for that. I have to go elite. To me, I have to go elite. There was no other choice in terms of good or great, right? Based on what we've seen from Quinn Ewers already, what we expect from Arch Manning, and I think what Trey Owens brings to the table. When you look at it with Quinn Ewers last year, had a really good season, right? Especially, coming off that back stretch of 2022 where he just did not look great the last 6 games. Did, however, look really good in the bowl game against Washington. I thought he came back in 2023 and looked really good, right? Played in 12 games, threw for 250 yards in 10 of those 12 games. Only 2 games he didn't was Wyoming, which was a little shaky, but we won that game. And then Texas Tech, we blew them out by 50, right? So he didn't need to throw for 250 yards in those games. Broke the all-time record for passing yards, and I believe passing touchdowns as well, or maybe tied passing touchdowns in the Big 12 championship game. And was shaky at times in the Washington game, but I thought really came on at the end, right? And so when you look at it, you're looking at a quarterback going into next season who's tied, for the lead in Heisman odds. At worst is the third, ranked quarterback going into the draft right now in terms of the consensus going around between Carson Beck, Shedeur Sanders, and Quinn Ewers. So he's likely going to be a first-round pick and should be the leader of a team that is a conference championship and national championship contender. So to me right now, you can't name 4 quarterbacks in college football better than Quinn Ewers. He is elite at this point in college football. Then you look at Arch Manning, what he represents, what we've seen from him up until this point, what he just did in the spring game, throwing for over 300 yards and 3 touchdowns on only 6 incompletions, right? Everything we've heard, everything we've seen from Arch Manning makes us think that he will live up to the Manning last name, which is elite, right? And then you look at Trey Owens, just the poise, the size, the ability to throw the football with accuracy, push the ball down the field. To me, he was underranked coming out of high school, and he just has so many really good traits that I'm not calling him an elite player right now, but his talent, comped with Arch Manning and Quinn Ewers also in that room, no way you can call them anything other than elite. And I do think that is the best quarterback room in college football right now. Moving on to the running back room, I wanted to call them elite. Maybe if Savion Red was still in the room based on the role he has and what he's brought to the table, in that Wildcat role, I would call them elite, but I went with great. Right. I went with great. Definitely has the potential to be an elite running back room. Definitely, I think we are at this point, knocking back on the door of solidifying ourselves as running back U, especially with, what we've had the last, 4 years. The last 2 years before running backs drafted. Keelan Robinson, Jonathan Brooks, Bijan Robinson, and Roschon Johnson. And you would expect, that to continue with Cedric Baxter and Jaden Blue. The reason I gave them great instead of elite at this point, I think they're elite talents, right? I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a room in college football that has the talent in the running back room that we have at this point, right? But when you look at it, Cedric Baxter, I thought he started off the season slow, really came on at the end, especially after Jonathan Brooks got injured. But I never saw elite production. I saw a really good to great running back. I think elite will come this year. Same thing with Jaden Blue. By the time that he was in the top 2 of the rotation, was really the last 3-4 games of the season. I thought he came on really strong, showed that explosiveness, showed his ability to catch the football, showed that home run ability at times, getting up to 22, 23 miles per hour on runs, which is freakishly fast, right? Especially, for a running back with pads on. And so I think, he has the ability to really break out this season. But also the last time we saw them on the field, even though they ran the ball really well, they both had 2 crucial fumbles that may have kept Texas out of the national championship, right? Then you're talking about a player in Trey Wisner, who we haven't seen a ton of, even though he ran really well in the Texas Tech game. Really good player for us on special teams. And then you're looking at Jared Gibson and Christian Clark, who are elite talents, in my opinion, but have zero production at the 40 acres just yet. So I wanted to be a homer. I wanted to say elite. I still think it's running back U, but based on what we've seen thus far, I have to say great, right? Because we haven't seen elite from Cedric Baxter yet. We haven't seen elite from Jaden Blue yet. And then, of course, nobody else in the room we can say that about either. So I think elite talents, great production thus far. Elite will probably come this season, but we haven't seen it yet. That's why I landed on great for this running back room. But 5 really good players. And like I said, I think we're still running back U. Wide receiver room, I had to go to elite, right? And this is where I'm going to have to go to the list, right? Because I can't name every wide receiver on scholarship off the top of my head. But when you look at this, I had to go back to, hold on. Apologize. I got to go to a whole different article on Inside Texas because I was looking at the transfer article. Okay, but when you look at the wide receiver room, I'll just start off the top of my head. And then when I find it, I'll click on everybody that's in the room. But you talk about, Isaiah Bond coming over and what he represented in college football last year. You look at Silas Bowden, who will be on campus in May. and what he can do on the outside or in the slot, even at the running back position, in terms of, an explosive player at 5'8". A lot of people talk about him in the Keelan Robinson role. I think he can even expand past that, right? Then you talk about a player in Matthew Golden, who was a great wide receiver for the University of Houston, but also an elite punt or kick returner. I think Jonte Cook and DeAndre Moore out of last year's recruiting class, are ready to step up and be top level receivers in college football this year. Obviously, we saw Ryan Wingo from day one, looks like a number one wide receiver. And then you still have players like Ryan Niblett, Freddie Dubose, Aaron Butler, and Parker Livingstone in that room. So 10 scholarship players on scholarship in the wide receiver room. And I think 6 to 7 right now could step on the field and be great to elite for this Texas football team. But at the top, right, like I said, Jonte Cook, DeAndre Moore, Ryan Wingo, Silas Bolden, Matthew Golden, and Isaiah Bond. I mean, that 6-man rotation right now would rival anybody's in the country. And if it would rival anybody's in the country, then it has to be elite, right? So just to recap thus far, quarterback room, elite, running back room, great, wide receiver room, elite, tight end room next, after a quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns once again is brought to you by Monopoly Go. Let me get my overlay game on. There we go. Monopoly Go. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying, flag on the play. You already talked about that, but there is just so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for time tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get. Unique stickers you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes. Cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with. Hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games, like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. And there's always new timed events to help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, so get off the bench and go download it now free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. All right, so now we are getting into the tight end room next, and just reading who is on scholarship in the tight end room. We have 6 players: Gunnar Helm, Juan Davis, Amari Nyblack, Will Randall, Spencer Shannon, and Jordan Washington. And I gave this tight end room good, right? I started to give it great, but I gave it good just because there's a lot that remains to be seen. We can definitely project and say there's some really talented players in this room, and we expect them to perform at a high level. That could be the case, but right now, based on the information I have, I'm going to go with good, right? And, I guess because the game is good, great, or elite, good sounds bad, but it's not bad. It's literally good, right? It's just not great or elite based on what we have. When you look at it, I thought Gunnar Helm really stepped up last year, really had a high yards per reception. I don't have it for you, but it was high. He was explosive in the opportunities that he got, but he's also played the last 2 years behind Jatavian Sanders, who was a 4th-round pick, but probably should have been a 2nd-round pick, and probably would have been a 2nd-round pick if he had tested how people expected him to test. So now that you're in the number 1 role, right, now that teams are going to be game planning for you, right, now that you can't hide, right? Or, we can't hide you. Teams are going to make sure you're covered on every play, or at least try to make sure you're covered on every play. Can you bring that same type of production, right? Can you have a Jatavian Sanders level season as the number 1 guy instead of being explosive number 2 tight end for us that really never got game planned for? Juan Davis, I think he's really talented, but we haven't seen him really put anything together yet at the 40 acres. This could be the season. But once again, right, you would have to project to, say Juan Davis is great or elite at this point. I think Amari Nyblack has a lot of potential. We saw last year at the University of Alabama, he averaged almost 20 yards of reception. So he was really explosive in his limited opportunities at the University of Alabama last year. And I think, somebody like Jaleel Billingsley, who came over at that position from Alabama as well, somebody that looks like a wide receiver, right, but could play in line when you ask him to as a tight end as well. Will Randall, this is no disrespect, but I always thought Will Randall was, kind of like a package deal with Arch. I mean, you're talking about Arch, the number 1 overall player in the country, and then Will Randall was his number 1 option, at tight end, but he was down at like 300-400, right? Which is not bad. It's not to say that he can't end up being a great college player, but to me, it always felt like Will Randall was a package deal, to the University of Texas with Arch, which makes sense, right? And I thought, I looked at it and I was like, well, maybe not, because Will Randall had a whole bunch of other Power 5 offers and like really high level schools trying to, get him to come. But then I also thought, like, how could you be serious about recruiting Arch Manning if you're not recruiting his best friend in Will Randall? So I think Will Randall is a good player. I'm just not sure, what his future is in this room. And like I said, I never really thought about what his future is in this room because I always thought that he was just here because Arch Manning was here. But Will Randall is in the room, and we'll see if he gets the opportunity. Spencer Shannon, I think he's interesting because of his size. You're talking about a player that's 6'8", 230. That definitely could be something that could be hard to guard at the tight end position, but we haven't heard much about his size and potential since he arrived on campus last year. And then Jordan Washington, who's a true freshman. I almost said Jordan Whittington, right? You can tell I miss my boy because I wanted to say it. Jordan Washington, who I think, out of the Houston area really could be that next Jatavian Sanders, right? I don't want to be lazy in my analysis, but I mean, we just saw Jatavian Sanders. So I think, Jordan Washington could be that next type of player at the 40 acres, but he's a true freshman, right? And we only have to go off of the spring game where he had two nice, really nice catches and then got hurt. So I think there's some potential in this room, right? I think there's some really good players in the room. I think that tight end will be a strength for us this season and moving forward. But based on what we have now, there's just no standout guy in the room or a guy we can say, yeah, he was dominant last year, or you could see potential dominance moving forward. And that's why I have the room is good. But, I'm more than willing to be wrong. I'm more than willing to come on here and remix this episode again and say they're great or elite at some point in the season. So we'll see. Right now I have them as good. Offensive line, I broke it up. Tackles, I have elite, right? At first I was going to say the offensive line was great. First I was going to say the tackles was great. But then I'm like, you may have the first tackle drafted next year in the NFL draft. Seriously, like Kelvin Banks could be a top 5 pick in the NFL draft. I think he's pretty much a lock to go top 10, and it'd be a conspiracy if he didn't go top 15, right? So if you have arguably the best left tackle in college football on your roster, that goes a long way in terms of saying your tackle room is elite, right? But then when you look what's behind him in terms of tackles, you have Cam Williams on the other side, right? Who we have to see production-wise what he could do as a starting right tackle. But physically, he's a mammoth, right? Like, I don't even, expect there to be any question mark in terms of what he can do in the run game when you got 360 pounds at 6'8" coming down at you at a high level, right? The question mark is, how nimble, how agile, how flexible can he be on his feet, guarding these pass rush. But I think in terms of at that tackle position, he already has an elite trait, and it's his ability to move people in the run game, right? We've seen that since Duncanville. So that's what you have as your starting tackles. Then you look at what you have behind that, and we've heard nothing but good reviews about Trevor Goosby, right? Like, if there was anybody whose stock rose, this offseason, I'd probably have to say Ryan Wingo the most, right? But outside of Ryan Wingo, I would think it would be Trevor Goosby, right? Because he came into the offseason as a wild card and left the offseason as the incumbent to Kelvin Banks, right? So I think he had a really good offseason. So you have Trevor Goosby in the wings, and then you have Brandon Baker, a 5-star out of Mater Dei, California, that's in the wings as well to play tackle at the University of Texas and can play on the left or right side. So right now you have Cam Williams and Kelvin Banks, and then in the future you could have Trevor Goosby and Brandon Baker, right? So you could have elite tackle play for the next 3 years, 4 years at the 40 acres. Had to go elite with the tackles. Interior offensive line, so guard, center, guard, I went great with that group. When you look at it right now, you have Jake Majors, you have Hayden Connor, you have DJ Campbell, who I think is a really good group in the interior, especially with the continuity they have and their ability to play so many snaps together over the last couple of seasons. Then you have a player like Cole Hudson, who's been here 3 years and has played all over the offensive line. You have him coming off the bench. Then you have really talented players like Jaden Chapman, Daniel Cruz, Nate Kibble, Big Nito, and Malik Ogbo as well, that should be in the mix over the next few years. So I went elite with the tackles, great with the interior offensive line, but we're spoiled, right? So it doesn't matter what you rank them because this is the best offensive line we've had in years, just in terms of a full, top to bottom, right? The depth, the elite talent, the high-end talent, the ability to, move players across the board. There are no complaints about this offensive line. So I go elite with the tackles and great with the interior. Excited for, a really good season from them. Then I want to talk about the edge room. I went with elite, right? I went with elite for the edges. I started to go great just because I think we've gotten good to great, production in the past. And, the players that you would pose as elite or the players that could be the needle movers for you or elite have not had any of that production at the University of Texas. But I did go with elite because you look at it, Barron Sorrell has been a very good edge rusher for you the last 2 seasons. Hasn't reached that elite level, but I think most teams would sign up for a player like Barron Sorrell on their defensive line. Same thing with Ethan Burke, right? Hasn't given you elite production, but I thought last year coming on 5.5 sacks, whatever it was, he was really good for us, right? Justice Finkley, been a really good depth player for you for 2 to 3 years at this point now. Trey Moore, 22.5 sacks the last 2 years. The only question mark is those sacks came at UTSA. But if he can do that at Texas, you take 22.5 sacks at any level of college football. That's elite over 2 years. Colton Bassick, I think, ready to come on this season. We'll see what he brings to the table, but a really talented player. Tassili Arcana, same thing. Hasn't came on yet, but a really talented player. And then you look at the true freshman, Zena Umeazulu, excuse me. He made some noise in the spring, had a few sacks during the scrimmages. And then obviously Colin Simmons, our all-world prospect, could be the best edge, the best homegrown edge we've had at the University of Texas since, Sergio Kendall or Joseph Osai, right? So, you talk about those level of players. And I think, based on the production we've seen, because Trey Moore has done it at a high level in college football, it was just at UTSA. And because, Colin Simmons is such an all-world prospect, and we've seen him do it at Duncanville, and all the reviews are that he played at a high level throughout the spring. And like I said, even though it hasn't been elite production, you've gotten really, really good college-level production from Ethan Burke and Barron Sorrell the last couple of seasons. Because of that, I'm going to go ahead and give the edge room a tag of elite, and I think they'll live up to it this season, even if I'm being way too early on that tag right there. A quick word from our sponsors, and then we end the show with the defensive tackle room, linebacker room, corner room, and safety room on today's edition of Good, Great, or Elite. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Today's episode is also brought to you by Yahoo Finance. Wouldn't it be great if you could see all of your investment and retirement accounts in one place? With Yahoo Finance, you can consolidate your views from multiple accounts into one hub and access the expert analysis you need to tend to your entire profile with confidence. Let's get straight to the point. You want to grow your portfolio to deal with the rising cost of inflation, to pay off your debt or your mortgage, pretty much anything standing in the way of you and financial freedom, right? With Yahoo Finance, you can get access to the news, data, and tools that you need in order to help reach that financial freedom. When it comes to your financial future, you think you've done it all. You saved, you've researched, you've invested all that you can. But now you need to take those investments to the next level by using what every financial great uses: Yahoo Finance. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor, yahoofinance.com, the number one financial destination, yahoofinance.com. Once again, that's yahoofinance.com. All right, last segment, we are doing the defensive tackle room, linebacker room, corner room, and safety room. And right now, I have the defensive tackle room as good, right? Not great, not elite. I have it as good. I think coming into the season, they were probably the room that I had the least amount of confidence in. And I would still say that's pretty much the case. When you look at it, 9 scholarship players in that room right now: Bill Norton, Vernon Broughton, Alfred Collins, Tia Savea, Jeray Bledsoe, Aaron Bryant, Sadir Mitchell, Alex January, and Melvin Hills. The last 2 players, true freshmen, and Alex January and Melvin Hills. And Steve Sarkisian said it himself, right, at the end of the spring window, in terms of spring practices, that he only had 3 players he felt like represented the Texas standard in that defensive tackle room. And that was Tia Savea, Alfred Collins, and Vernon Broughton. And then he brought in Bill Norton, right? And so that would be, I guess, 4 players, right? That 3.5 maybe, because we haven't seen a ton of Bill Norton yet, that potentially live up to his standard of what he wants in that defensive tackle room in terms of size and production. But he also said that they want 5 to 6 players that they can have at that position to play at a high level. So right now we think we have 4, more than likely have 3, and the goal is to get to 5 or 6, right? Like basically with that spelled out, there's no way that the room could be elite or great at this point, all right? Especially when you lose to Andre Sweat and Byron Murphy. Now, 2 top 38 picks, right? Which was great for them. Shout out to them. They made a lot of money over the weekend a couple of weeks ago. Now, right, once again, I could come on here and remix this again, update my resume. Hopefully I'm a Texas fan, so hopefully I'm wrong, and hopefully they go out and give us great to elite production this season, right? Which could happen because they're really talented players. But based on what we have in the room right now and based on the information we have, I would say it's good. The potential to get to great, but right now it's good, and I'm hoping that they prove me wrong. Right. Moving on to the linebacker room, based on what you have on scholarship, I think it's great. Right. Almost said elite, right? You got Mo Blackwell, David Bender, Leona LaFau, Anthony Hill, Darian Gillette, and true freshman Ty Anthony Smith. And I think when you look at it, you have an elite player in Anthony Hill. And so I went to elite almost, but then when you look at it, there's nobody else that you would classify as elite in the room, right? David Bender, love his, just his work ethic. I love his, skill level, his athleticism, and his ability to play downhill. And I thought he really came on, especially towards the end of the season in coverage, right? So that's something that's going to be the big thing for him this year, right? I think he's an amazing downhill linebacker, right? Great leadership, great IQ. How can he play in space, right? That's going to be the biggest thing for David Bender this year. Mo Blackwell started the season hurt last year. I think he's going to have a bigger role on this team this year, especially with the loss of Jalen Ford and Jet Bush, 2 really good veterans in that room. And then you talk about depth for Leona LaFau. I think Darian Gillette, now a year fully removed from that ACL, could provide some value to this football team. And I think Ty Anthony Smith was a really good flip from Texas A&M, a linebacker they have a lot of, faith and confidence in, and project really good potential over the future. So great. You do have an elite player in the room. I can't go to elite at this point because the only elite player in the room is Anthony Hill, but we could be seeing elite production from this room throughout the course of this season. When you go to corner, I have to say great, right? With corner, I go great. And let me look at the corners we have in the room: Gavin Holmes, Jahdae Barron, Jalen Gilbo, Javion Cole, Malik Muhammad, Warren Robinson has moved over to corner, and then true freshman Wardell Mack, Kobe Black, and Santana Wilson. I think it looks a lot better than it did when you had lost, Terrence Brooks and Austin Jordan and had not brought in Javion Cole yet. Obviously, a ton of talent in the room. I think Jahdae Barron can play really well at the star or outside. I think Malik Muhammad is a, college level superstar at that position. I mean, you talk about a player like Javion Cole coming over from San Jose State, who posted grades of 83 plus overall coverage and run stopping last year as a 170-pound corner. Jalen Gilbo, who's played really well at the star position for us. So there's a lot of talent in that room. And then that's not even mentioning, the true freshmen like Kobe Black, Santana Wilson, and Wardell Mack. So a ton of talent in that room, but based on the production we've actually seen, it has been great. Not elite. I expect them to be great this year. If they were elite, that'd be a pleasant surprise for me, right? They certainly have the talent to be elite, but right now, based on the information we have, that room is great, right? And the safety room, ending the show on that, I give them a great ranking as well in comparison to good or elite. When you look at the safeties, we have Andrew Makuba, Michael Taft, Jelani McDonald, Derek Williams Jr., Jordan Johnson Rubel, and Xavier Filsami. Now, I think that when you look at this room, right, Michael Taft, Derek Williams, Andrew Makuba, and then you brought in a 5-star safety in Xavier Filsami, and then a high 4-star in Jordan Johnson Rubel. This is a very talented room, right? Like all 5, 6 players in it may be elite talents, even Jelani McDonald, right? But, based on the production we've seen, up until this point, Andrew Makuba has not performed yet at the University of Texas, even though I expect him to do it at a high level. But based on the way the safeties performed at the end of last season and then everybody else in the room being a newcomer, I have to go with great, right? But if there's going to be any room that performs at an elite level this year that I did not give an elite tag to, then I would not be surprised it would be the safety room. Because like I said, when you look at the talent level in the room, right? I mean, it's pretty much all 5 stars and high-level players that have performed at a high level in college up until this point. Safety was not a strong point for us last year, but I think this year we could have elite production from that room. So great right now. But like I said, it would not surprise me if I had to remix this once again and come on here and say we were getting elite play from our safeties. And as a Texas fan, who sometimes put on those burnt orange glasses, I would want nothing more than to be on here and say, yeah, I was wrong. Our safety room is elite. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Hook 'em. Peace.